Our epistle reading today is taken from the book of 1 Corinthians, Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 7, and verses 29 to 31. Listen to what the Spirit might speak into your life today. In 1 Corinthians 7, 29 through 31. I mean, brothers and sisters, the appointed time has grown short. From now on, let even those who have wives be as though they had none, and those who mourn as though they were not mourning, and those who rejoice as though they were not rejoicing, and those who buy as though they had no possessions, and those who deal with the world as though they had no dealings with it. For the present form of this world is passing away. May God bless to our understanding this reading from God's holy word, and to God's name be glory and praise. Amen. Paul says here in his first letter to the church at Corinth, I mean, family, the appointed time has grown short. How urgent Paul sounds. The world as we know it is just about to come unraveled, he believes. Jesus is coming back any minute, Paul believes. We need to live like people who don't care about this world, which some Christians are quite good at. Marriage, grief, joy, work, these things don't matter any longer. For the present form of this world is passing away. Such urgency, such certainty, such a sense of looming apocalypse, such a miscalculation. Here we are 2 millennia later. And what was all the urgency about? Surely, as I stand here preaching from this text, surely I think maybe it's some kind of foolhardiness to preach from a text that has been disproved, perhaps even fallen into disgrace. The world is still the world. It just keeps coming, doesn't it? It's always changing for sure. But the world is still the world, the one that God so loved, the one that Christ came not to condemn. In Paul's defense, as he gets older, his letters become a little less apocalyptic and more cautious as his career advances. Here in 1 and 2 Corinthians, he's still at the height of his zeal. And we who live on the downhill slope side of Christendom, in a world where silent churches and weathered steeples punctuate the landscape, we tend to forget just how urgent the early Christian movement was. Just how new, how countercultural, how strange, how revolutionary, how apocalyptic. They really expected the end to come in their lifetimes. You know, many streams of Christianity, ours for example, have become kind of comfortable in this world and made themselves at home. And that's good. Because how can you serve a world whose destruction you're waiting for? Paul definitely miscalculated the timing of Jesus' return. He may have miscalculated the whole meaning of Jesus' return. But he got another thing quite right. The urgency of a life of faith. The urgency with which Jesus showed up on the beaches and said, "Follow me." And they just up and followed. The urgency that we ought to feel in our lives for their brevity, for their beauty. There's an urgency that we sometimes miss. We invest so much energy into things that don't really matter. The present form of this world is passing away. It always is, and it always will. Christ calls us with a sense of urgency about our lives. The present form of this world is forever changing, always evolving, always becoming something we no longer know. I think I've told you before that my favorite TV show of all time is that old show from the 1990s, 1990 to 1995, Northern Exposure was that show. I loved the 90s. I still love them. And Northern Exposure was a great show. In fact, I just got a very excited message from my sister-in-law saying it's finally streaming. They couldn't stream it for all those years because it had too many songs in it that they had to get the licensing for. It was a comedy about a young Jewish doctor from New York who ends up serving in some far-flung village in Alaska to pay off his medical debts. The show kind of blends outdoor life with philosophy and literature and humor, as no show has done before or since. Of course, back in those days, you had to watch the show when it came on. Unless you had a VCR and you could tape it onto a VHS tape, which that was way too high-tech for me. That's one way in which the world has not changed. One of my favorite episodes was called Things Become Extinct. Isn't that a great name for an episode? Things Become Extinct. In it, if you're familiar with the show, there was a 63-year-old bartender whose wife, I think, was 22. The 63-year-old bartender named Hollis learns that his favorite uncle has died at the age of 110. Hollis is surprised because men in his family are supposed to live to 120. It seems awfully early, and so the whole thing sets Hollis off into a midlife crisis. Because even if he gets to live until he's 120, he's at the middle of his life. Maybe just a little bit past it. Is this all there is? And Chris, the radio DJ, tries to comfort him by saying that he had his midlife crisis when he was 22 because men in his family die at 44. In another storyline, Joel, the Jewish doctor from Queens, is longing for the company of his own kind. He learns of a village some miles away that was settled by Russian Jews, and he goes to find it only to discover that it's a ghost town. And at the same time, the young movie lover, Ed, starts making a documentary about the disappearing art of carving flutes with which the Native Americans made their music. You know those haunting flutes that make those songs? It is a disappearing art, and the flute maker does not care that he practices a dying art. And Ed is aghast. How can you not care? How can you not be upset that you're one of the last flute makers of our people? This is our music, the music of our people. How can it just disappear? Ed asks. And the flute maker shrugs and says, things become extinct. Things are always getting gone from the world, even good things. The mastodons were magnificent creatures. They're gone. Hollis grieving about getting old, Joel grieving about losing his Jewish identity, Ed grieving about the disappearance of a traditional art form. But the flute maker, these things just happen. Even good things get gone. We waste so much energy trying to resist impermanence. We can't even stand the word impermanence. We waste so much energy trying to resist it. Let us live urgently for the things that matter and hold lightly the things that don't. The present form of this world is passing away. The world is always changing. It's too bad. I don't know about you, but for me, I feel like it took me so many years. It took me decades to come to peace with myself, to accept myself, to even like myself some of the time, to come to a place in life where I feel like I kind of got this thing figured out. But when you get to that place in life, your body sort of starts to give up. I guess you can't have everything at once. The world exists in a constant state of flux. It was true in St. Paul's times. I think it's even truer now. Our call is to live passionately and joyfully the day that we're given, and to live it with a sense of the bigger picture, a sense of perspective, cherishing the things that truly matter, and holding lightly those many things that seemed to matter in the moment, but don't really. Live with urgency the life that we're called to live, investing our time and our energies in things that matter to us deeply and not wasting resources on things of lesser importance. You know, Paul puts all of this into very apocalyptic language because he really does believe that the urgency is created by the fact that Jesus is going to come back, everybody's going to be judged, there's going to be a new heaven and a new earth. That was going to happen in his lifetime. We're not that kind of Christian, really. We're the kind of Christian that feels more called not to escape the world, but to serve it, to love it, to be a blessing to it, to find goodness and beauty in it. Our calling is to joy, even though the present form of this world is always passing. Oh, history. We get caught up in its endless sweep, all of us. History. We're all its children and its victims, its beneficiaries and its makers. History could have clothed you in a beehive hairdo. Actually, maybe some of you it did at one point. History could have put you in a powdered wig, but it put you here. It put you now. And it seemed to do so with great intention. Surely you were meant for the times that you were given. I mean, it took eons to get you here. It took a lot of ancestors and a lot of circumstances to bring you to this time and this place. No one asks for the day that they're assigned, but we all must embrace its challenges just as willingly as we accept its benefits. I don't like the scary, weird politics of 2024. I hate them. But I love modern dentistry. And I think that makes up for it. I would hate to live in a time before modern dentistry, though they probably ate less sugar. The constant ebb and flow of time is actually a great happiness. For though we would like to slow it sometimes, or maybe even stop it altogether, it is our impermanence that gives our lives their worth and their urgency, our great and fleeting beauty, our urgency, to use that word again, to live these lives while their moment is upon us. Because we know this, we're perhaps the only beings that do know this about ourselves, that you and I and everyone we know will die. And some small circle of people will think back on the things that we said and did, but over years the memories about us will diminish, and our names and our memories will survive maybe 2 generations, maybe 3. We'll be lost to the world of time and history, though gathered fully to the life of God. Impermanence. It's not a sad thing. It's a freeing thing. It's a freeing thing. Our time here is brief and precious. We're invited by its brevity to find our joy while it's still possible, to love whomever we want to love, to live however we want to live, as long as the loving and the living hurt no one and bring well-being into the world around us. When time is short, it comes with this sense of immediacy, urgency. Do the things that matter. Let go of the things that don't. You don't have enough time for all of it. Who lives long enough to spend any of these precious fleeting hours on anger, on hatred, on sadness, on revenge, on envy, on regret, on greed, on sadness, on fear? We don't have enough time for that. Looking back on the time we're given, won't we wish we had settled that meaningless feud much earlier than we did? Won't we wish we had spent more time together? That we'd picked up the phone and made that call, that we'd written that letter, that we had issued that invitation, that we had developed that skill or pursued that dormant dream? It's the things we didn't do that we end up regretting. We do not live forever, and within the brief span of years that we're given, we find many opportunities each day to live for things that matter, things that create beauty, things that echo goodness and grace, that spread compassion and generosity and goodwill. This is urgent work, being human, even if Jesus is not coming back later today. This is urgent work. being chosen for the gift of life and health and prosperity. This is urgent work being appointed to the 21st century in America today, with its opportunities and distractions, its benefits and its pitfalls. Our impermanence is a gift. Everything depends on the fact that we don't inhabit these bodies forever. We're created for the challenge and the blessing of our times. Let me ask you a question. How would you live if there were a meteorite careening toward the earth and they said, a week? How would you live? There have been many TV shows and books and movies about just this kind of thing. And in those shows, people live in a variety of different ways, knowing they've got a life of 1 week left. Some indulge in vices, others in virtues. Some turn to prayer, others turn to recklessness and crime. Some draw nearer to the ones they love, others abandon everyone and go seek adventure. People have always lived with looming threats in every age in history. I mean, if you were a Scottish farmer in the borderlands in the 1600s, there were always these roving bands of brigands who could show up and upend your life or worse without warning. If you are a peaceful monk on the coast of Ireland in, say, the year 800, living a life of prayer, you never knew when that Viking ship would show up on the horizon, spelling certain doom. I think we feel like it is our unique pain to feel like the sword of Damocles is hanging over our heads in these times. But people have always lived this way. People have always had their looming threats. Back in the 1970s, back in the days of serial killers and leaded gasoline, we used to practice those nuclear bomb school drills, hiding under our desks as small school children. All times have been dangerous. For all their drawbacks, these times actually seem easier than many. The world is always changing, and sometimes for the better. In the early 1950s, the forerunners to the Branch Davidians, do you remember them? David Koresh, Waco, Texas. The forerunners to that group assembled on a hill near Waco, Texas, to wait for Jesus. They had done the math, and they knew when he was coming back. At 2 o'clock on a Tuesday, though we know Jesus never did anything on Tuesdays. It was always Fridays and Sundays and Thursdays. They were coming back at 2 o'clock. He was coming back at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday, and they could not wait to get out of Texas. That was supposed to be funny. Just to be safe, they came a few days early for in case they had made a slight miscalculation. And when Jesus didn't come, they lingered a few days late, hoping they had made a slight miscalculation. But Jesus did not come. And the world did. It just kept it coming, as it always has, as perhaps it always will. Our faith was not meant for avoiding the world. Our faith was not meant for escaping the world, but for engaging it and transforming it and helping us to be transformed by it, for we can be transformed by the beauty and the goodness of the world. And so, let us leave today with a few things in mind. First, let's be like that flute maker. Change happens. Impermanence is always with us. Let's just embrace it. Let's be okay with it. The world is forever changing. That is part of its beauty. That's part of its sorrow. And you probably know by now that beauty and sorrow are all mixed up together. We can accept impermanence because it makes all growth and all happiness possible. And to quote the flute maker, things are forever getting gone from the world, even the good things. Mastodons were magnificent creatures. Things are getting gone, making room for other things that need to be. There's no sadness in change. For though we are children of our times, we also belong to eternity. In life and in death, we belong to God. For in the secret life of God, nothing good is ever lost. And secondly, like those fishers of old who left behind their boats and their nets and even their father to follow Jesus, when he turned up so urgently on the beaches of their life, calling them perhaps by name. We too are called to respond to the summons when it reaches our ears. Clinging is one of the most unhealthy things we do, and we all do it. Ours is to respond to the times we have been appointed, to embrace their blessings and rise to their challenges. Ours is not to escape the world, but to find our joy in serving it. For the present form of this world is passing away. This is certainly true. It always has been. Maybe we should be living these lives with just a little bit more urgency. Amen.